Good morning, everyone. I know we're due to start at 11:30, but we'll just give it a couple of moments, as I know there's a few more to attend. So look to go forward in a few moments. Okay, good morning, everybody. My name's Keith Jenner. I'm a Senior Independent Endpoint Assessor for NCFE. I cover business services, so customer service level 2 and 3, business admin level 3, and team leader level 3. Just a bit of housekeeping before we sort of move on. If there are any problems with anybody who cannot see the screen or hear me correctly, if they can pop that into the chat on the right hand side, and I'll endeavour to put that right for you. As we go on, if you could put any questions in the question box, which will come through to me, and I will again endeavour to answer them as we go and make sure by the end of the webinar we've answered your questions and you can go away happy, or B, if I can't get the answers, as they may be to do with a qualification that I'm not fully fay with, then I will endeavour to go away and get the answers for you, and we will follow that up on an email. If we're happy to start, I will move on. So with regard to the agenda today, what we're going to do is go into different portfolios for different standards. So explain to you which standards use portfolios, how they use it, and if there's any general timescales of when the evidence should be produced. We're going to go into the responsibility and who should be involved. This is one of my big things, and should be a really important aspect of what you take away from this webinar, exactly what your responsibilities are, and some of the sort of things that we're seeing and I am seeing as a endpoint assessor on what's coming through. What does good evidence for an endpoint assessment portfolio look like? What we like to see, what is good practice, what do good pieces of evidence, how is it, easier working for you, but actually gives the maximum amount of each piece of evidence coming through to endpoint assessment. We've got some further tips that have been put together by the wider team after an email went out and sort of, can we give you ideas? So that's to come together from actually endpoint assessors on the ground, delivering, looking at portfolios. These have come from them, and obviously sort of us as a senior team in the delivery as well. Labeling and how you can use the evidence summary sheet to benefit you, how that benefits us as well, which at the end of the day benefits the apprentice by getting the best out of their evidence and also access to the best grade that they can possibly get. And then we're sort of run through some guidance materials which are out there for you to use, and that's anything from an evidence summary sheet right through to a template to help an apprentice write a reflective account or an assessor write an observation. So that's the agenda we're going to go through. So if we move on to the first part, so different names for different standards. These are the standards and qualifications that we use portfolios for. So the first one at the top is Customer Service Practitioner Level 2. They're all called different names, which makes it more difficult, but there's a name for each of them. So Customer Service Practitioner is called an apprenticeship showcase. It's showcase of evidence assessed by the EPA against the standard criteria detailed in the assessment plan, with an opportunity to question further to cover any weaker areas at a later date, and it has to include a PDP. So the showcase should be compiled after 12 months on program learning. So it needs to include a PDP, and with regard to the showcase about the timescales, the evidence from the previous 12 months of learning can be used, but it just needs to be revisited. It could be about a process that was spoken about or assessed right at the beginning of the apprenticeship, and just before it comes through to us, it should be just revisited to see if that process is still valid, see if it's changed in any way, and just bring that evidence up to date. Business Administrator Level 3, it's a portfolio which isn't directly assessed but will feed into an interview. So it will be used to check against criteria, and we will then create interview questions to demonstrate application of KSB, self-reflection, understanding of evidence submitted. Has to include an employer statement, and the evidence is gathered throughout their time on program. So how this generally will work, we will literally sit and assess the portfolio into the criteria, and then if there's any contextual or any clarification or any extra knowledge we need around that piece of evidence, they will be questioned on that. So it's really vital that they know what's being put forward on their behalf, and they know what potentially they could be questioned on within the interview. Team Leader Level 3, it's a portfolio of evidence, and this is the one portfolio that is literally, it's against the full EPA standard criteria, so it's probably the largest portfolio that we would deal with. And it enables them to demonstrate how they've applied their knowledge and understanding in a real work environment. Evidence should be generated over the period of the apprenticeship. So there's a huge amount of work, there's massive amount of knowledge, skills, behaviours about the whole criteria, and this is where we're going to get onto a bit further down the line when we talk about how to put it together. It's how quality over quantity. So a quality piece of evidence is going to be a much more efficient way of working and trying to get multiple criteria covered. Associate Project Manager Level 4, this is a new one out from NCFE. It's a portfolio of evidence reviewed by the EPA to help them make a provisional assessment decision for each learning area and devise questions in preparation for the assessment session. So that will go into the interview and professional discussion for the Level 4 assessment day. And Healthcare Support Worker Level 2, it's an evidence portfolio. The evidence portfolio is completed by the apprentices in the 3 months leading up to the endpoint assessment. The portfolio must include direct observation in the workplace as the primary source of evidence. Okay, so moving on to the portfolio, the responsibilities and who should be involved. Now, this is a really big thing from my point of view and what we're seeing throughout EPA delivery. So developing a suitable portfolio is the ITP's main responsibility on behalf of and with the apprentice. The The second one down, involve the apprentice as they may be questioned on the evidence. As we've just discussed in the previous slide, business administration, associate project manager, potentially customer service, they could actually be questioned on this evidence that's been put forward as part of their portfolio. So they need to know a meeting needs to have taken place and they need to be fully aware of what's being put forward. Portfolio should be agreed with the apprentices as this is their work which could affect their grade. What we found, and obviously this is starting to get better as everybody sort of understands endpoint assessment a little bit more, but the showcase is the one area, especially on customer service, where actually this has really affected the grades of apprentices. They've delivered on the observation and the professional discussion, but it was actually the showcase that brought them down to a pass rather than a distinction. And I think this is a real area where it's vital that the ITP and the apprentice really has a look, agrees, and puts forward the best showcase they possibly can. So just moving on to what constitutes good evidence for a portfolio. I think the first is how much evidence. Now, the portfolio is supposed to be a showcase of the evidence that they've done on program and specifically selected to be put forward for the assessments. It's not a huge amount of work that they've already done that we just put forward into CEPA as their showcase. It needs to be that, looking at it, and the assessment, the guidance materials that we've got available that we'll come on to later will show you exactly how this can be assisting and supporting in the delivery of this first one. So we recommend a maximum of 25 pieces of specifically picked evidence showcasing the apprentice's knowledge, skills and behaviours. Good average size is 8 to 12. If they're holistic and they're really well written, the observations are good, then you can get absolutely a distinction on 8 to 12 pieces of evidence. We've had 60 to 70 pieces of evidence done. It's really difficult to try and get that sort of into multiple criterias and try and get them the best mark. So realistically, we're looking for 25 maximum, but it can be done on 8 to 12 really well written holistic pieces of evidence. A variety of evidence, including observations by ITP employer, professional discussions. So that's just, a variety is really good because it basically gives the best chance, if you've got an amazing observation where you've seen an apprentice doing something, to have them to then write about it and an employer statement just explaining that they've seen it really does give that depth of evidence that can actually absolutely open up better grades and into distinction criteria. Be careful when using knowledge questioning, as this is one-dimensional and normally ask or cover one criteria. Absolutely, and a general example of this, and I do apologise that, you know, I am working on business services and I do see it from a business services point of view, but there are evidence around the team leading, around management theories and team development theories and things like that. And if you ask a question about that, you literally will only go into that section. However, we've had massively impressive piece of evidence about how they've incorporated that into a reflective account about their team and about an appraisal they've done or a team briefing that they've done, and that really does open them up to sort of much more holistic piece of evidence that's going to go into many more places, rather than if you're just going to say, can you explain a team development theory, that's really one-dimensional. So we're going back up and we're saying, you know, it's really good holistic pieces of evidence that make the best evidence in a portfolio. Good detail on specific subjects. So moving on to that holistic piece of evidence, we've, you know, evidence well written on chairing a team meeting for team leader, coaching others and receiving feedback for business admin, dealing with conflict, customer service. If written really well, they can go into 4, 5, 6, 7 criteria at a really good level. So you don't necessarily need a piece of evidence on an appraisal and then more evidence to cover it. If that appraisal piece is written really well with some in-depth detail, then it can really go into other criteria. Observations, reflective accounts written well. professional discussions focus on specific areas. Again, we find professional discussions are amazing in portfolios because inadvertently, when you get an apprentice talking, he's going to move into different areas without even knowing it. And on your behalf, what we're here to do on a portfolio is to absolutely squeeze the most out of every single piece of evidence that you have. Can it go to multiple areas? How can it be taken into the context that we need to be put into areas as well? So, you know, when you're writing observations and reflective accounts, if they're written well and you're prompting on professional discussions, these can really be the best piece of evidence coming forward. Annotated examples of product evidence to back up. Yeah, if they're explaining a task, if they sent an email regarding communication, if they've delivered an appraisal, you know, back up and annotated examples of that product evidence is really good. We obviously need to keep in line with GDPR, but, you know, something to back up what they've written about is really fantastic on this portfolio aspect. And at the bottom, it's detail, detail, and more detail. If you're thinking you may need more detail on a piece of evidence, then go and get it. Don't just put it forward. It's absolutely, the more detail, the better. Okay, so labeling and using the evidence summary, evidence record sheet. So these benefit both yourselves as ITPs and us. So ensure you correctly name and reference the piece of evidence in the evidence record sheet, and only the final piece of evidence listed or uploaded. So the evidence record sheet is a piece of guidance for each standard that's out there for you, and it's basically a mapping exercise detailing all the criteria required from the portfolio, and also giving you areas to label each piece of evidence and where you think that goes into. It can be used for you guys just to make sure you've covered everything, you know exactly what you're putting forward, why you're putting it forward, and you're uploading the correct evidence. And for us, we don't use it at the start. We basically take each evidence under its own merit, and we will map that in. However, we will use it if we're looking for a really specific piece of evidence about a specific criteria. Rather than having a look through 25 pieces, we will look at the evidence record sheet and see where you believe, in your opinion, that goes. Label evidence simply. So employer statement 1 for an employer statement, or RA1 for a reflective account. Long labels really don't make a huge amount of sense for us, and we need to use it in our mapping documents, potentially for EQAs to come in and have a look. And if we're looking at references like VQX 4001-1, it really does make it quite difficult to start map it in and space. So if we can keep that simple, it's actually better for both of us. Ensure labeling on the evidence record sheet matches the evidence uploaded and labeled on SEPA. That's a basic exercise, but it can really take into time if that doesn't happen, if there's extra evidence, or if there's evidence missing that could potentially be really important where we would need to contact you. If there is a piece of evidence, you've given us an evidence record sheet, and there is a piece of evidence that covers a criteria, you said it does and it's not there, we will contact you just to upload that. However, we do need to try and make sure this is right first time. Ensure all evidence is dated on introductions, on professional discussion, clearly state date and time. This is needed, just going back to the first slide about when evidence should be taken, whether it could be always on program or it needs to be in the last 3 months. The professional discussions and all evidence should be dated. And introductions, we've had professional discussions where there hasn't been that introduction. We haven't been able to use it because we can't actually confirm that the name of the apprentice on that piece of evidence. So if that can be done, that's absolutely of a benefit. Just moving on now, these are hints and tips from sort of the wider team. Ensure the apprentice work and EPA evidence has been through your organisation's IQA process. 2 eyes are better than 1. We have had evidence come through that there's spelling and grammar issues, there's potentially feedback that the apprentice hasn't taken on board, which has missed out a section of the evidence that they wanted to write about. So just make sure that it's been through your IQA process and you're happy with that going forward. Ensure that you include observations and witness testimonies completed by the ITP and employer where possible. Observation and witness testimonies, and I'd probably put reflective accounts written well. They really are the pieces of evidence that we look for to go into multiple areas. And also observations and witness testimonies, they're really going to back up. If an apprentice has said, I've delivered an appraisal and this is how I've done it, if we've got an observation there to say we've seen them do it, and a witness testimony to say, yes, I'm happy with it, they do it to a great standard, that's where you're going to be going into distinction criteria and higher level grading. Ensure your evidence matches the criteria. Now, we're getting into a couple of points about wording, and this is really important. So, for example, level 3 business administration. So is there evidence of coaching others? So if they put forward evidence that they have coached others, that's great. But in another section, there is, have they proactively coached others and received feedback? So potentially a piece of evidence that you've put forward a bit one-dimensional about evidence of coaching others is great, but written well and taken into account, did they proactively coach others and what feedback have they received? One piece of evidence could do that, and potentially at the moment we're probably seeing 2 or 3 that need to come through to really get that covered. So really keep an eye on the wording of the evidence criteria that you need. Again, on this second one, this is round sort of customer service. So ensure you understand the criteria descriptions. So does it ask for an example of or plural examples of? We've had people miss out on marks and grades because they were only giving one example when the criteria specifically looked for examples of, and if in doubt, always over deliver. If you're not sure one's going to be enough, find another one and put that forward. Do not upload draft or duplicate pieces of work. I've touched on this before, but we've received pieces of work where there's been feedback in the margins from the assessor. There's been assessors with guidance on what to write next, where the next paragraph absolutely has taken on that guidance. We've had feedback right at the bottom from it, so it's blatantly an on-program piece of work which can be used, but all that feedback needs to be taken out and it needs to be clean when it's uploaded. And then the final one there, ensure the apprentice is producing work that shows that they've learned and developed and are able to demonstrate their knowledge, skills and behaviours. So, you know, if there's a piece of work about an appraisal where they delivered one and they were going through training at the start of their apprenticeship and then they got better and they delivered one towards the end of their apprenticeship, maybe just a piece of evidence or a professional discussion to explain their learning and development, how they've got to that stage, is a really good sort of way of getting into the higher level criteria, because sometimes it looks for reflection. So that's really important. Use holistic evidence where possible. And this is another example of where holistic is probably better over knowledge questions, as, for example, team leading. So the managing people section has 12 areas to be covered regarding HR and processes. If a really well-written reflective account around delivering appraisal, it will cover 7 of them, where I've had knowledge question, literally just a list of knowledge questions, and they were answered, which, yes, they showed some knowledge, but it's only going to go into the knowledge area. If you're going to write an about appraisal about what you've done, if you're going into a skill, it can potentially be used for knowledge as well. As I say, use sort of 2 or 3 dimensional pieces of evidence rather than knowledge questions, which can just be sort of one dimensional sometimes. Again, ensure that whoever's conducting a professional discussion, they introduce themselves, name, job title, and their role in the apprentices program. This is really important because with regard to some of the standards and MCQ tests, the invigilator and things like that cannot be involved in the apprentices program. So we just need to know exactly who's been involved in all the assessments. Ensure that at both start, at the end of the recording, the date and time are confirmed, and ensure the recordings are clear and concise. We've had some where they're in a cafe or the noise is really bad, and I know it's difficult sometimes when people are working actually on site in their job role, but you need to ensure the recordings are clear and concise, and they're checked, because sometimes they come through and potential marks are missed out on because we actually can't confirm the audio. Ensure all PDPs one-to-ones have clear dates and targets and are agreed with a suitable person. I think with regard to PDPs, there are some where they're actually mandatory, but if we're expecting a PDP to come through as evidence, especially around the sort of level 3 area, then PDPs should be reviewed and targets reviewed and completed. If we've just got a PDP with a list of goals that haven't been achieved, then there's not really a massive amount of places that can go. So we would like to see that that's reviewed and that whole process is moved through an evidence of that, rather than just the start of a process, which could then again, it could affect marking. And again, the final one, just ensure all evidence is clean and no notes on margins, because it has to be clean when it comes through and assessed. Moving on, just for the NCFE guidance materials available. So on every standard, there's a portfolio guidance. So it explains how much evidence, the criteria that's going to be marked against, some hints and tips, and some real guidance on how to go about putting that through. Gives details on the assessment and criteria to be covered, and it also includes the grading descriptors for higher level grading. And I think that's really important, where we have some portfolios come through and they really have only looked at the past descriptors, and they really are only ever going to get a pass out of it. So you have a look at the descriptors, have a look at the higher level grading, and make sure you're covering them to give the apprentice the best chance. There are template documents for employer statements, observations, and reflective accounts. And this literally, so the reflective account one for the apprentice, if you're going to set them to deliver a reflective account, it literally, for the customer service one, will go into each section, like influencing people, dealing with conflict, so they can really do some work on all the sections. So that can be a really good way for them to go out, do a reflective account, come back to you. You can look at the grading descriptors and go, no, actually, let's do some, can you add some more things to the influencing people, and that can really get them going and making sure that you're covering each section. And then the evidence summary or evidence record sheet, there's one for every single standard, which will make sure that you can map in putting forward, you know, the evidence that you're putting forward, you know, potentially the grade that you could be getting. If we agree with you, you're making sure every KSB is covered, and you're confident what you're putting forward is all there. And then that also works for us in the fact that we can sort of have a look and see where you think evidence goes if we're really struggling to find some piece that could make a really big difference on their grade. So that's the presentation that I have for you. If you do have any questions, could you pop them in the question section, and I'll endeavour to answer them. I don't know if that's a good thing that there's been no questions so far. Maybe I have covered everything, but just having a look. Can we email the slides? Yes, absolutely. I haven't managed to. Health and social care, if I just go back on the slides. The healthcare support worker, so this is for, there is an evidence portfolio available, and there is guidance online. If you cannot find that guidance, if you speak to one of your assessors, then they will absolutely be able to get hold of that for you. And any other health and social care, but I was only aware that the health and support worker had an evidence portfolio there. I will absolutely email the slides, and if any of you sort of did have any problems with sound or anything like that, then we can potentially have a look at redoing this webinar, just so we can make sure you get all the information. Copy of The recording, I believe, will be available, and I will double check this and get that out to you. But yeah, I would absolutely think that the recording would be available for you to share. There is a couple around the senior healthcare worker, and what I will do, I will get the healthcare team to do probably a bit of an email to come out to you with a bit more of a session on that. This was trying to be quite generic, and obviously from a business services background, that probably may not have gone into the detail that you're looking for healthcare wise. So what we can look to do is maybe get some more specific information out to you. I've got another one there on the teaching assistant as well. Looking for health and social care. That's there's one more here. Be interested in a webinar for health and social care portfolio. I think what we'll do, I've got health and social care, and I've got some healthcare and a teaching assistant query on sort of their side of the portfolios. What I will do is maybe we'll look to get some more specific knowledge out there for around portfolio, and maybe do look to do a webinar on that side, just so you guys can sort of have that knowledge sort of delivering this webinar as well, rather than the business services that I've delivered. So I will absolutely take that feedback back to the team, and we can get that out for you. Is there any sort of queries or questions? Okay, well, if there's no more questions, then thank you very much for your time, everyone. I hope you have a good rest of the day. And if you do have any queries, if you can just email your team on this, then we can get any further queries out from this. We'll get the answers back to you straight away, so you can go out and you'll be confident in what you're putting forward and delivering. So thank you very much for your time. And I've just got dental as well through on the question. So I've got teaching assistant, I've got healthcare and dental, and we will look to find a way to get that information out to you, whether it will be by another webinar or a different channel, but we will certainly be working with you to get that information on portfolios out for you.